second. It means that instead of sheepishly moving around the perimeter, looking at exhibit after exhibit as we traditionally do, you're actually forced to rotate. And as you're forced to rotate to look at the easel, you create changing relations of foreground and background. And as you do that, you create opportunities for things to return to your eye and then to your mind, because you're likely to see that painting back at the back while your attention is focused here. And then when you come back over there, that painting will be the focus of your attention, but you'll sort of turn around and see the painting you might have previously seen when you were on the left side of the room. So there is this way of using the spatial distribution of the objects to create a sense of cross views, repeated views and changing views, objects placed in a variety of relationships with one another. Sometimes thematic, one painting of Mary and one painting of Jesus, for example. Sometimes not thematic, sometimes contrasting. And the other thing, and so this is just a diagram picking up the overlapping patterns in the visual field. But the other thing he does is he actually plays size up in ways that are not absolutely conventional, so that tiny paintings are juxtaposed to huge paintings, which by definition will mean that you have to change your distance from the wall, right? Because if we suppose that clear vision is, let's say, a 30-degree angle, let's say for the sake of argument, or 60, doesn't matter, you would have to moderate your distance from the wall in order to see clearly. And then you would have to dance a complicated dance which is partly driven from the distance factor and partly driven from the way that the easels are located. And so the point here is that Scarpa downstairs and upstairs at Castelvecchio is using the notion of the museum regulating movement, not simply in the mechanistic sense of making sure people will go to the galleries where the main message is, but in a far more poetic sense of literally choreographing a way of relating body, eye, perception, and hopefully understanding. And so it is this transition from the mechanics of movement to the poetics of movement that is of interest here. And as though to underscore that, he locates the main statue of the previous owner of the castle, as you know, in a very interesting junction along the path from the Napoleonic wing to the older wing. There he is. And as you would go up, you would sort of get various views, but he would only be staring at you when you've already entered the gallery. So it's almost like there is a critical moment when you exchange face-to-face contact, and from every other moment it's a kind of haphazard angle. How long do I have, Laura? Okay. So in the same vein of actually trying to negotiate between developing technical tools and developing an awareness of questions, we recently looked with a student that I actually have in Athens at the Museum of Byzantine Culture in Thessaloniki, which was designed by one of the most gifted modern Greek architects, Krokos, who died maybe more than 10 years ago. It's a building which is extraordinary in its detailing, and its almost didactic use of architectural detail as a way to introduce people to essentially the history of architecture, at least in Greece. A rather complicated plan, at least at face value, but essentially it's you come into a courtyard and into a main hall, and then it's essentially a loop that goes upstairs and returns downstairs. But what attracted us to the building was the conflict, or maybe in this case creative tension, between qualities that the architect thought would enhance the message and qualities that exhibition designers and curators think might enhance the message. So, for example, in Byzantine churches that I'm sure many of you will have visited, one of the key qualities is the play of light. and the play between dark and slightly illuminated and more illuminated locations. And that quality that play between darkness and light is actually far more powerfully handled in the corridors of the museum, as though the corridors are the main transmitter, if you like, of what's important, and far less well handled, in my judgment, in the main exhibition halls, where then the curators have taken over, doing an extraordinarily well-documented, painstaking effort of highlighting the value of every piece, whether we're talking about icons and art, or whether we're talking about, in other rooms, everyday objects. But in doing that, they seem to have chosen a sort of mode of display which emphasizes either partial frontalities, a highlighted, individualized object of great value to which you're supposed to have a frontal relation, or slightly more grouped frontalities, but always a system of highlighted, distinct frontal views as the dominant mode of viewing. This photograph may not be capturing this as well as it could, versus the much more gradual experience one has in the church, where from one location to another things are sometimes seen, sometimes guessed, sometimes simply glimmering as you get, for example, the gold on an icon to sort of reflect light, and sometimes seen clearly. So we thought that the only way to begin to analyze that is to develop some sort of conjunction between lighting analysis and visibility analysis and the geometrical sense, in order that we can then select icons of interest, for example, one here and one there in this particular church, identify points at different ranges of distance from which these icons are geometrically possible to see, and then make records of all the other icons that are potentially co-visible, but use the analysis of lighting to actually distinguish between those that are clearly visible, those that are dimmed, and those that are hardly visible given the light, and therefore to begin to quantify the experience of movement as an experience that changes not just the geometry of co-visibility, but the intensity and the quality of it. I didn't have time. I sort of, these days I amuse myself being an administrator, so I didn't have time to dig out the equivalent images from the museum, but I hope you get a sense of at least what the thrust of the tool has been. And this is the work of Yana Stavroulaki, who has got her PhD a year and a half ago in Greece. Pega will talk about the high in a minute, and I won't at all steal her thunder, but the high is interesting in that everybody loves to hate it because it has openings where you would want to hang paintings. But from the point of view of a naive architect, me, it's also an extraordinarily interesting building in that it has always challenged the balance between focal attention to one display at a time and distributed attention to changing clusters of co-visible displays. And Pega will make this cryptic statement far more clear in a minute. But right now, if one visits the High, it's actually a stunning example of two very different sensitivities to how one might handle museum space. The far more classical Renzo Piano version of the open plan in the sense of how you might move, but very classical in how it puts the emphasis on the entrance hall and then on the two key nodal spaces and then to the peripheral spaces, versus the original Meyer second floor, where you had this very intricate embroidery between visual cross views that sort of give you a glimpse of backstage versus visual overviews that create a theatrical sense of occasion front stage. And so in Meyer, there had been at least an attempt to play front stage overview and backstage cross view or glimpse in a way far more challenging than the much more straightforward rendering of piano. So I look forward to what Pega has to say, and I'll stop here.